All rise. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. The Honorable Superior Court, County Wake is now convened for a special sitting. The Honorable Powell C. Ridgway, President and presiding. Oh yes, God save the state and this honorable court. Please be seated.
Thank you, Sheriff Harrison. It's an honor to have you in our courtroom today. It's indeed an honor to call to order this special session of the Wake County Superior Court for the purposes of remembering and paying tribute to members of our bar who have passed away. I'd like to welcome each of you to this courtroom. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the Memorials Committee of the Wake County Bar Association, who led by Leonard Jernigan and Clark Brewer, coordinate this wonderful ceremony each year. We greatly appreciate the fine work of this committee. Now, we gather today to honor members of our bar who have labored in the vineyard of our profession and have gone on to greater reward. These lawyers were our colleagues, our mentors, and our friends. As some of you may know, I lost my mother this summer, and I well know how sorrow when suffered alone is much more painful than when shared among friends. So we gather as friends to share your sorrow, but in looking down this list of those who we honor today and seeing the names of those who will be offering tributes, I'm confident that not only will we share sorrow, but we'll share laughter and remembrances of happy times. With that being said, it's my pleasure to recognize John Mabe, President of the Wake County Bar Association and 10th Judicial District. John.
Thank you, Your Honor. I take great pleasure in welcoming you and greeting you on behalf of the 10th Judicial District. This is the largest judicial district in the state. It's rich in history, it's rich in personality, and it's rich in personalities. Today we are poorer for the loss of the esteemed members of our bar, poorer, but we're not impoverished because our deceased colleagues have left us with a legacy of stories and memories and examples. So today we celebrate the memory of these individuals. This project, again, is part of our ongoing effort to honor those who make this the great bar that it is, and I'd like to add the thanks of the 10th Judicial District to Lenny and to Clark for their work and for their whole committee's work in setting up this ceremony. Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Jernigan.
Thank you, Your Honor. On behalf of the committee, also want to welcome you. I would ask, after presenters speak, if you would hold your applause until the end of the entire presentations. Our first speaker is Dallas Cameron. He is originally from Dobson, is a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill for both undergraduate and law degrees. He is currently the Governor Easley's Senior Assistant for Governmental Affairs, and he'll be speaking on behalf of Dallas Cameron.
May it please the court. Dallas Alexander Cameron Jr., also known as Little Dal, Moose, and Uncle Dal, was born January 10, 1939, to Dallas Alexander Cameron Sr. and his wife Esther May in Lake Waccamaw, North Carolina, the largest natural body of water between Maine and Florida, east of Mississippi, south of the Great Lakes, right up the Green Swamp, and heading the Waccamaw River. Dallas could say it much faster and much better. It was a way I understand from Judge Bullock that Dallas, when he was in New York City, used to attract members of the opposite sex with his swamp tales. Dallas was the brother to Nancy Cameron Cable. As a young boy growing up in Lake Waccamaw, he learned early his lifelong traits of even-handedness, patience, graciousness, survival, self-reliance, and bravery. Camping alone at night in the Green Swamp, and there hunting frogs, snakes, and alligators. Riding out at home the 100-mile-per-hour winds of Hurricane Hazel, and achieving the rank of Eagle Scout. He graduated from Hallsborough High School in 1957 packed to go to to Davidson on a basketball scholarship, he decided at the last minute to go to UNC Chapel Hill, much to the dismay of his Presbyterian mother. After receiving his undergraduate BA degree in law in 1961 and his JD in 1964 from UNC Chapel Hill, he joined the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a special agent. J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI soon recognized Dallas's traits of courage, survival, and self-reliance. And during the height of the Cold War, they transferred Dallas from fighting organized crime in Steubenville, Ohio, which was a wide open border town on the Ohio River back in the 60s, to specialize in counter-espionage, pursuing Soviet spies in New York City. There, Dallas became, as Judge Bullock pointed out so ably at Dallas's funeral, Dallas became the expert in the country in identifying who our spies were, who their spies were, who their spies were spying on them, and who our spies were spying on us. Because of this singular knowledge, he was flown behind the Iron Curtain on multiple occasions to positively identify who was who during the height of the Cold War. In 1972, at the behest of his law school roommate, Federal Judge Frank Bullock, who is here with us today, and who was then the Assistant Director of the Administrative Office of the Courts, Dallas returned to his native state to work as the first training director and advisor to magistrates in the newly formed General Court of Justice. That work caused Dallas to develop a lifelong admiration for magistrates and their role in the judicial system, and propelled him to become a leading advocate for the improvement of the office of magistrate. In 1973, then Director of the Administrative Office of Courts, Burt Montague, asked him to work on an as-needed basis with then Chief Judge Frank Bullock of the Court of Appeals, Walter Brock of the Court of Appeals, to implement the newly established Judicial Standards Commission. Subsequently, at the request of Judge Brock, Dallas became the first full-time executive director of the commission on January 10, 1977. The high ethical standards he set for the accurate investigation of and reporting on allegations of judicial misconduct helped to cement the Commission's reputation as a fair and even-handed arbiter of complaints and accusations against judges, rather than the star chamber so many had feared would evolve. On January 1, 1979, Dallas was appointed by Chief Justice Susie Sharp as her administrative assistant and as the Assistant Director of the Administrative Office of the Courts, positions he held under successive Chief Justices Susie Sharp, Joseph Branch, Rhoda Billings, James Exum Jr., and Burley B. Mitchell Jr., until his elevation by Chief Justice Mitchell to Director of the Administrative Office of the Courts in December 1996. Dallas held that office until his retirement in February 1999. From those offices, any judge who called to speak to Dallas would be greeted with a warm and hearty "Your Honor Extraordinaire." This greeting of genuine affection for the judges with whom he talked and worked would be followed by Dallas's best efforts to promptly accommodate all reasonable requests. Dallas was the quintessential public servant who never lost sight of the fact that as a state employee, we are employees of the taxpayer, and as an employee of the judicial branch of government, his duty was to do his best to ensure the fair and impartial administration of justice. He was loyal to his employer, honest, open, and humorous in his advice and dealings, understanding of people's problems, wise in his counsel, and humble about it all. UNC School of Government professor and dean of the Judicial College there, and former director of the Administrative Office of Courts, Jim Drennan, said that Dallas was a wise man who did not want you to know he was wise. On December 31st, 1992, Dallas married Christy Spear Price, who is here with us today, clerk of the Supreme Court of North Carolina, who survives him. This union placed under one roof the two top appointed administrative professionals in North Carolina's General Court of Justice. And from this vantage point, Dallas and Christy administered the state's highest court and all of its courts until Dallas's retirement as director in February 1999. Their marriage not only combined their related roles under one roof, but each of their families, including Christy's sons, David and John, and Dallas's beloved daughter, Gabrielle, who is here. Throughout the remainder of his life, Dallas treasured his new and combined family. As the most important women in his life, Dallas cherished Christy, Gabrielle, and his sister Nancy, and was proud of each of them, their talents, and their accomplishments. Each was a gift to him for which he was devoutly thankful. Dallas Alexander Cameron was a connoisseur of fine cars. A 1949 Henry J. he drove in high school, with tires so thin he had to take cardboard to use as an inner tube. A customized mid-50s Volkswagen he drove at Carolina with the driver's seat taken out, replaced with a lawn chair to accommodate his long legs. And a $100 Chrysler automobile he bought in New York City to chase evildoers throughout the streets of New York City. He was a skilled and fearless sailor, an urbane host or guest, a natty dresser with his ever-present pocket handkerchief, an absorbing and entertaining raconteur, and a discriminating expert of fine boxed wines and sundry renderings of both eastern and western North Carolina cornfields. I will go into no more detail as the sheriff is here, so I have no idea what happened to it. Dallas died on August 13, 2007, after a long and difficult struggle with lung cancer. Told on August 11 that he had only a short time to live, Dallas said to Christy, "Let's make it 48 hours of fun." And this they did, inviting friends and family in for final visits and reminiscences. The Raleigh News and Observer, in an August 21, 2007 article, wrote that the many visitors to their home during this period, quote, witnessed a shining example of how such an illness can lead to an oddly uplifting event, end quote. And that was because Dallas confronted that time with fearless courage, with faith, grace, his characteristic humor, and most of all, overriding dignity.
Our next speaker is Bill Rouse. Bill is a native of Raleigh, was admitted to the bar in 1956. I presume he's retired. Not so. I stand corrected. He's going to talk about and honor Jack Gulley.
When Margaret called me to do this, I was flattered and humbled. I never thought I'd be doing this for Jack. Jack Gulley. Jack was born and grew up in Johnston County, finished high school in Clayton, went to Chapel Hill, where he graduated Phi Beta Kappa. He had a scholarship to Wake Forest Law School, and he graduated there with honors. He came back to Raleigh with a bride he had met in school. She was Faye Mobley from Goldsboro. She was a twin. Her sister Kay married Deutsch Langston, a lawyer in Goldsboro, some of you may know. And those girls looked so much alike and acted alike. One time when I picked up Jack to go to a football game, Faye came running out of they were living in the Oberlin Road apartments over there, Country Club Homes. She came running out and threw her arms around me, and we walked arm in arm up to the door, and the door opened, and I thought Jack was going to step out, but Faye stepped out. They were pleased to pull that one over on me. She looked alike. They looked alike, giggled alike, all their mannerisms. Later, when they had the 25th anniversary, Kay came up for that, and I could tell the difference they still favored. But when Faye died, she was back looking like Kay. Kay was back looking like. Jack, when he came to Raleigh, he went to work for Manning, Fulton, and Skinner. And Charlie Fulton brought him in the vault very early in the game and introduced him around. And he was so outgoing, very gregarious, never saw somebody he didn't know. And we became very good friends. Jack had a very quick mind, retentive, inquiring. He did not have any problems meeting people. He had a great sense of humor, very gregarious, outgoing, and in his field he knew what he was doing. He was very reasonable in his charges. He had all the traits that I look for in a lawyer. They don't come any better. When Jack first came, and as I said, I met him pretty early in the game. We started going to Carolina football games, and we continued doing that for years. At first, we had seats, two of us together, and then down the road, we expanded to 4 seats and moved across to the visitor side, where we were right at our seats. We could be gone before people emptied the stadium. At that time, I met Larry Johnson. He introduced me to him. Larry was from Clayton also, and Jack said they were on the same, I don't know if it was 6-man or 8-man football that Clayton played. And he said the reason that Larry was a quarterback was, and I haven't sought to find the validity of this, he said the only reason he was a quarterback was the only one on the team that couldn't throw a forward pass. But Larry since clerked with us, and then we were partners. Jack loved athletics, loved sports. We attended a lot of the games. He and I coached a Little League baseball team. The sponsor was Johnson Lamb, and Gene's son played on the field. But the coaches were very, very close. We got along very well together. We were not world beaters, but we were competitive. The highlight of our career was when we played First Citizens. They hadn't lost a game in 2 years, and they were serious about the stuff. They scouted the other teams, stuff I never heard of before. And we beat them 4-1, and that was a celebration we never got over. When we practiced, Jack was like one of the young ones. He got out there and took bat and practiced like the boys did. And when it was over, I had a 1944 Army Jeep, and we loaded 15 boys in that thing. And if they'd have gotten us, they'd have locked us up. But we didn't drive but about 2 or 3 blocks, and we get them ices. And Jack was very popular with the boys and also with the parents and the other coaches. We didn't have these incidents that you hear about in Little League. Jack, when Margaret was born, their daughter, I went up to the hospital, and it looked like a light had been turned on inside his head. He was beaming when he took me down there to show me Margaret. You would have thought Faye had nothing to do with it. He was a real family man. Margaret later married Rob Tyson, who Jack could not say enough nice things about. And my meetings with Rob have verified that. He's a wonderful man. They had 2 wonderful children, Jacqueline and Connor, and Margaret bought a house. Margaret and Rob bought a house near Jack, and he spent a lot of time with those grandchildren. You've heard it said that there is no more melancholy phrase in the English language than what might have been. And I'm sure when those children get older, they will see that. But at the same time, they have some consolation in knowing the love of a grandfather that Jack had for those children. After Margaret died, sometime later, he married Judy Tudor. He and Fay and the Tudors were members of the Raleigh Country Club, and I'm certain they met there. And she afforded him a lot of happiness in his later years, and helped dispel some of the loneliness he must have had. Jack was very stoic. He was very sensitive and loving, but at the same time, he was very stoic. I know at his mother's memorial service, and when he told me about his brother dying prematurely, and at Kay's funeral, he held up like a trooper. I never will forget in law school, Freddie B. McCall, who some of you had, he read on the first wills course, he read a few funny wills, and then he read one that Grace Kelly's father wrote. He was a wealthy man. He apparently didn't have much use for lawyers because he wrote his own will. And he said that he did not want his loved ones to stand around grieving. He said they should suffer like a thoroughbred who suffers inside. And I thought that about Jack. He didn't let on. He didn't telegraph his concerns and his fears, but he had to suffer. I know how he felt. We vacationed some together, went to the beach. One time we went to the ABA convention in San Francisco and went to all the Candlestick Park and Haight-Ashbury and Cannery and all that sort of stuff, and we really enjoyed it. And Jack had a lot of things to say about it, but most of them were not politically correct. But we had a great time, and I thoroughly enjoyed Jack so much. I did not see him as much in later years, mainly because he took up golf, and that's to me not been a major part of my life. I've never cared about golf, but he was crazy about it. And he was very active in the Raleigh Country Club, where he later became president. And his grandchildren took up a lot of his time. Chuck Green and I ran into each other, and we were talking and said, why don't we go eat lunch and call Jack? So I called Jack up, and he didn't return my call. And I thought it was kind of strange, but I just assumed he was out of town. But Margaret called me and said that Jack was in the hospital. So I went out there, and he was sitting up, looked good. I mean, looked just like he'd always looked, reading the newspaper. And I asked him what was wrong, and he said, not a lot. He said, I probably won't go home today, but I will tomorrow. 2 or 3 days later, I got a call that he was terminal. And Chuck and Bud Hassel and I went out to see him and tell him goodbye. It was horrible. I couldn't imagine the degree of recession that it took place in just those few days. But I don't remember him. Don't remember him that way. I remember him in a lot of other ways, just like a lot of us that know him remember him. And as long as we have those memories, Jack will live forever. Thank you.
Next speaker is Bill Merriman. He grew up in Raleigh. He attended UNC Chapel Hill for law school and undergraduate school. He's practiced in Raleigh for more than 40 years.
Your Honor, John Wall Liles Jr. was born October the 1st, 1934 in Rex Hospital here in Raleigh. The son of John Wall Liles Sr. and Eileen Shamley Wall Liles of Sanford, North Carolina. Jack has a sister, Lou Liles Knight of Burlington, and she's here with her husband, John. Jack Liles attended public schools in Sanford, North Carolina. and he graduated from Davidson College in 1956 with the highest scholastic average of any red-headed guy in his class. He attended the University of North Carolina School of Law and graduated in 1959. Jack married Jane Street of Charlotte, and they have 2 children. John Wall Liles, who's here, he lives in Raleigh. He works for the Department of Revenue. And if you see a man in this courtroom that looks just like this guy 30 years ago, that's John. Jack has a daughter, Mary Howitson Liles, who lives in London. Because of the distance and the economy, she was not able to be here today, but she sent her blessings and great memories that she has of being with her dad. Jack began his career with Pointer, Garrity, Hartsfield, and Townsend, now Pointer and Sproul, where he worked in their real estate division for many years. After that, he and I formed a partnership, and over the years, we closed many, many real estate transactions. Jack was a member of Hudson Memorial Presbyterian Church, where he served as chairman of the Board of Trustees. He served on the Board of Trustees of Wake Technical College. He served on the Board of Directors of the Boys and Girls Club of Wake County. Jack was a longtime member of the Raleigh YMCA and was an active mentor through the Big Boys program through the Y. Jack died November the 26th, 2007 in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and he was married at the time to Pam Liles. Jack Liles loved North Carolina, he loved Wake County, and he loved the practice of law. We members of the Bar Association will miss him in the years to come.
Next speaker is Rick Rogers. He's originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and graduated from UNC undergraduate and law school. He has been a former law professor at Campbell University. He now practices down in Burgon, North Carolina. Bill Pittman. Speaking.
Please, the court. This will be a little different. This tribute is over a year old, and it's going to require a little explaining. I'm Rick Rogers, State Bar 3476. I think that's what it is. It's in Roman numerals on it. But I'm not here as a lawyer today. I'm officially, my connection with Bill, I suppose, comes more out of a little family company that we started about 6 years ago. It's called Blackacre Title Insurance Company, our agency. Blackacre is not really a title insurance agency. It's a great deal more than that. We specialize, we enjoy helping new lawyers get started. So we're a small firm, startup, consulting, technology, marketing. We will do just anything that's necessary to help this little group, and it's only about 20 or 25 of us across the state, get their practices open and make them successful. One of the things that we do is provide each one of our folks, we call them Blackacreans, by the way, we provide each one of them with 12 hours of mandatory continuing legal education every year. We have this out at our farm near Bowie's Creek, and we call it Homecoming. And so what I have for you today is the opening statement that got our Homecoming CLE launched a year ago, or a little over a year ago, on October 8th of 2007. Those of you who don't normally attend these sorts of things, it's traditional to have an opening statement or a convocation. And so this is what was presented into this room of young, new, hardworking, and successful lawyers. October 8, 2007, Bill Pittman Appreciation Day. It might not show, in fact, I hope in an odd way it doesn't, but Blackacre Homecoming takes a fair bit of planning. These next 2 days have been something I've thought about, at least mentally organizing, since early January. And as far back as January of this year, I decided to do something a little different and make today Bill Pittman Appreciation Day. Most of you, actually all of you who took my real estate transaction course some 5 or more years ago, have at least some awareness of Bill Pittman and what he did for me when I was a fledgling attorney. For those of you who didn't take the class or have otherwise forgotten this detail with the passage of time, I'll do a quick recap. I graduated from UNC Law School in 1971. In the 3 years I was there, no one showed me a deed or will, or demonstrated a title exam, or even uttered the words trust account to me. The closest thing I ever heard about a real estate closing was a description of a bewigged ceremony called livery of season. They still talk about it. Yet I graduated, took and passed, amazingly, 2 bar exams, and through a series of complete misadventures, woke up one morning to find myself the best, the worst, and the only lawyer in a marvelous little town in western North Carolina where the only law in demand was real estate closings. And there was a lot of this for me to do. To ready myself for a new career in dirt lawyering, I augmented my law degree and license with some malpractice insurance, and that's when I plowed into a stump. No one in Chapel Hill had told me this, but it suddenly seemed that I needed just one more thing before I could make this new living: approved closing attorney status from a title insurance company. It's difficult for you younger lawyers, and practically all of today's lawyers are indeed a lot younger than I have somehow become, to imagine a world in which there was only one title insurance company. But in North Carolina in 1972, it was Jurassic Park, complete with mastodons, pterodactyls, and one title insurance company, Lawyers Title. And that outfit, whom incidentally today we now represent, it had such high button shoes that it simply could not ever dream of approving my impertinent application to become approved for anything they'd put their name on. And so much for practicing law in Highlands, or anywhere else that didn't involve suckering a real law firm, that is, one with a pre-approved in-house lawyer's title approval, into hiring me. This title insurance thing was an end to a career that hadn't even begun yet. By happenstance, and within a day of the hopelessness of this situation becoming apparent, I received in the mail my very first issue of the North Carolina State Bar Quarterly. Some of you still get it, that joyful rag that still arrives with the breathless news of the bar's most recent disbarments and public floggings. As I tossed it away with a ceremony I still relish, I noticed the full-page announcement on the back cover. A new title insurance company had been born and was calling itself First Title Insurance Company of North Carolina. The second astonishing feature of this announcement was an invitation for me to call them at their expense. The phone number was 1-800-662-7729. Now, there were only 2 area codes in North Carolina back then, 704 and 919. And so this whole advertisement was beginning to take on the slightly off-putting fragrance of a fish market. But I was desperate, so I made the call, and what was my first Watts phone call of my career. And Bill Pittman answered the phone. He said he'd work with me on a learner's permit approved closing attorney basis. I didn't know it at that time, but I just found my mentor. Over the next 10 years, Bill taught me what I needed to know and spent countless hours on the phone with me, always on his nickel. We did a lot of business together. He told me later that my firm, that had grown pretty quickly to 3 attorneys and support staff of 9 people, had even more quickly become his biggest customer. That made me feel good in several ways, mostly because I thought he deserved it. More than any other person, he made me the lawyer I was then and am today. It is the literal truth. I could not have done any of this without him. In 1982, Campbell caught me at a weak moment. Its Dean Leary Davis called me up and said he wanted to train lawyers as well as educate them. So I sold out to my partners and moved the family to Bowie's Creek. My favorite class there was real estate transactions, and I taught it the same way Bill Pittman taught me. Each year for 20 years. I also invited him to take a week's worth of the course and teach a program on title insurance. And his response was to do this and automatically admit any student who can make it through this class with automatic closing attorney status at first title. Something I don't think has ever before or since happened in the history of legal education. Imagine, take this class and you can practice law. What a concept. Bill ultimately picked up some newbie customer lawyers from these appearances, but I never could repay my gratitude because he always stayed ahead of me. He started hiring my students. Kim now Kim Upchurch, I believe was the first that he hired. Many more followed. Then Bill hired Bryan Rosenberg, who might be the last of Bill's hires out of Campbell, and who later succeeded Bill when Bill retired, at least the first time, from this business. Now, when you're a teacher, there's nothing more special than someone who shows his appreciation for your work by hiring your students. So I never could quite even the score with Bill. The UCC notwithstanding, I have always remained indebted to him. It's odd that in spite of his influence on my life, Bill and I were never close socially. I suppose distance had a lot to do with that. I think I'd met his wife Susan once, maybe twice over the past 30 years. I've never met all of his 4 well-grown kids. Nancy, my wife, and I attended as business guests one football game in Chapel Hill about a quarter of a century ago. Now, it was mostly telephone and professional conversations that bonded us, which is an odd pot of glue because neither one of us think much of the telephone. But I thanked him and credited him many times and publicly for being my mentor, and I'm glad that I did. Bill died last Tuesday. A rare and virulent cancer that surfaced a few months ago consumed him. I had a chance to say goodbye to him in September, and I did. And I told him then that the plans for Bill Pittman Appreciation Day were still on. So what does Bill Pittman have to do with you and with Blackacre? Bill never advised me on Blackacre. He didn't have to. Blackacre is simply a Bill Pittman redo with a professorial overlay and a garni of technology. Following Bill's model, Blackacre is based on close and early professional relationships predicated on mutual respect and a lot of hands-on support. Blackacre succeeds only when you succeed, just as Bill's first title did. Just as I could never quite pay Bill back for all he did for me, here's what he and I would both ask you to consider doing. You're new lawyers now, but still you've changed. And while you might not fully appreciate it, you're not as new as you once were. Already to some licensees, including the 800-plus strong crop of the 2007 admittees, you are the establishment, meaning mostly that you were here when they arrived. In the land of the blind, a one-eyed man is king. As little as you think you know, you're still king to some. And just as Bill passed his torch to me many years ago, I now pass it along to you. This means as little as you think you know, it's time for you to pass it along. Find a newbie and become his or her mentor. Be a Bill Pittman to someone. Perform that random act of senseless kindness. You'll be astounded at what it does for 2 people. I'm not at the end of my professional career, but I believe I can see it from here. You can't see yours yet, but years from now when you can, I hope you'll be able to look back across the decades and say with confidence that you've helped others with their dreams. That's what Bill Pittman means to me and to you. We are both living his legacy. As for you, I ask you to think now to the day when you too can see the end of your career. Can you name some new or newer lawyer that you've helped? No? Well, I think you'll then be looking at a waste. And you'll have nothing to show for your time in this profession but the money. It's entirely your call, but I really hope you won't let that happen. This I've lived, this I know to be true, and this Bill and I pass on to you. That was the end of that. And on a personal note, I've been without my mentor for a little over a year now, and I still miss him.
We have a slight change in the program. Mr. Taylor's going to have 2 speakers. John Williamson, I think Mr. Ellis is going to be the anchor of the team. Is that correct? Then I'll introduce Mr. Williamson. He is originally from Boonesville, Kentucky, graduate of the United States Military Academy, has a Juris Doctorate degree from Duke, and is the former chairman of the Maupin-Taylor litigation section, and he is now retired. Is that correct? Thank you. Welcome.
Ridgway, honored guests, members of the jury. Jesus, what a panel. I'm glad that Lynn explained the the change in your program because I knew half of you would be wondering how Mr. Ellis became suddenly so young and handsome. And the other half would be wondering, who is that guy and when do we get to hear Ellis? My name's John Williamson, and I was a Taylor-trained lawyer. Would the other Taylor-trained lawyers in the audience please stand? Thank you. These men and women, and dozens more like them who are not here today, are a large part of the lasting legacy that Mr. Taylor leaves behind. Their ranks include 3 federal judges. Mr. Taylor would also be proud to point out that the list includes his children, Bill and Elizabeth, both of whom clerked on the U.S. Supreme Court and now are among the first rank of lawyers in the District of Columbia, to whom our esteemed politicians look when they become enmeshed in the criminal justice system. All these lawyers have this in common. Rarely a week goes by that they do not use some skill or knowledge passed along to them by Mr. Taylor, or find themselves considering what he would have done if he was faced with the problem now facing them. One cannot begin to adequately cover the breadth of this wonderful, multifaceted man in only 10 minutes. But if I were forced to describe him in only one word, that word would be teacher. To understand why he was such an effective and influential teacher, you must start with his own remarkable and unique educational background. Mr. Taylor was born in Warrenton, North Carolina in 1912 and was buried there 96 years later. Warrenton has never been a very large spot on our state map, and its current population is only 740. His first year of formal education was in Miss Lucy Hawkins' private school, and that shaped his views of what public education should aspire to be. Miss Hawkins was so effective that when Mr. Taylor left her after 1 year and transferred to the public schools, he was immediately bumped into the 4th grade. As a result of that advancement, he completed high school when he was only 16 years old. He immediately enrolled in Davidson College in 1928, and after a year there, transferred to UNC simply to get a little closer back home to Warrenton. At the end of his sophomore year at UNC, the Depression was in full swing, and Mr. Taylor left college and returned to Warrenton to find work. He started at a job paying $15 a week, only to see that quickly cut to $10 a week. After 2 years on those wages, he had still managed to save enough to consider returning to school, and he'd already decided what he wanted to do with his life. He somehow persuaded Wake Forest Law School, which was then still located in Wake Forest, to admit him to law school despite the fact that he lacked an undergraduate college degree. He paid his $25 tuition and enrolled in 1932. When Mr. Taylor had completed only a year and a half of law school plus 1 summer session, he took and successfully passed the bar exam in 1933. Put to the decision of whether he should return to Wake Forest and get a 3-year law degree or go out and make a living, he took the money he otherwise would have paid in tuition, bought a set of law books, and hung out his shingle as a solo practitioner in Warrenton. As a result of this, until he was granted an honorary Doctor of Laws degree by Campbell University in 1991, he had no college degree whatsoever. And he really enjoyed pointing out to young whippersnappers from places like Duke that there were no diplomas on his office wall. Mr. Taylor's active legal career spanned nearly 60 years, ending with his retirement in 1993. His first 29 years were spent in solo practice in Warrenton with an occasional associate. The second half of his practice began in 1962 when he, Tom Ellis, from whom you'll hear, and the late Armstead Maupin joined as partners to form Maupin, Taylor, and Ellis in Raleigh. The firm still exists in the form now known as Williamson Mullen. By the time Mr. Taylor had moved to Raleigh, he had already represented Warrenton for 4 sessions in the General Assembly, and he had served as one of the youngest presidents of the North Carolina Bar Association at age 46. He continued throughout his career to provide service to the state, serving on the Board of Trustees of ECU, the Board of Governors of UNC, and on Campbell University's Presidential Board of Advisors. He was an early supporter of both ECU and Campbell because he believed deeply in the services that they filled and the void they filled in eastern North Carolina, and he was particularly influential in their expansion and their growth. When our insurance commissioner managed to drive out the last remaining private medical malpractice insurer of lawyers in North Carolina, Mr. Taylor was one of the original board of directors of Lawyers Mutual, and his fiscal conservatism there helped make it the solid institution that it still is today. Mr. Taylor hired me in 1973 for $800 a month to carry his briefcase and to do what he told me. I came to appreciate that that experience was much more valuable than my 3 years of education at Duke Law School. Mr. Taylor was a generalist, and if you worked for him, you were expected to be a generalist also. It was an era when you thought long and hard before telling a prospective paying client who came through your door that you couldn't handle their problem. The breadth of legal matters that Mr. Taylor had handled over his 29 years in Warrenton was astonishing, and he'd take great delight in telling you that he knew how to place a mortgage on a mule. He had a near photographic memory, and he'd demonstrate that by reciting poetry or discoursing on the war between the states, or giving you from memory the case citation that would win your case, complete with accurate book and page reference. Today, computer research tools make all of us seem smart, but in the days before that, we at our firm had what we called Taylor on Law. Taylor on Law took the form of a multi-volume set of notebooks in which for decades he had laboriously, manually entered and methodically cross-referenced cases and statutes, which he kept updated by the week, covering all developments in the law which might have any role whatsoever in our cases. As a result, 5 minutes spent with him were guaranteed to save you 10 hours of wheel spinning, and of course, in the days of hourly billing, save your client quite a bit of money. Although his personal friends called him T, within the office, our intra-firm nickname for him was Wizard. Wizard was based on our experience that he could tap his magic staff 3 times and solve any problem that ever came into the office. He was always our final word on ethical issues, and his approach to that was pretty simple. He believed that law was a profession, not a business, and a lawyer had to always honor the rule of law. His advice was always that if you were concerned enough to come to him to ask whether a particular course of conduct would come too close to the line, then you'd answered your own question, and you shouldn't do it. He was also the keeper of our firm's finances, and having survived the Depression, taught him how to conserve a dollar. If at any given time you'd sold every automobile that our 3 senior partners owned, it would have brought you about enough for 1 trip to the state fair. I remember in particular one old Ford Falcon that Mr. Taylor had painted a garish yellow using what I think must have been a broom. He drove it into the ground and gave it to a young relative, had remorse, bought it back, and drove it for 2 more years. Although he was never able to convert me to his taste in cars, I owe him a special thanks for placing the law firm and me on the path of financial prudence and stability that enabled me to retire early and start enjoying life. He was an absolutely wonderful storyteller, and most of his stories came with a lesson learned. It is usually the good storyteller, rather than the editor of the law review, who makes the best trial lawyer, because they know how to talk to and persuade a jury. I remember with great fondness riding in the back seat of Mr. Taylor's car off on one of our cases that took us throughout eastern North Carolina, while he and Mr. Ellis sat up front and told war stories, and I soaked it all in. I'll burden you with just one. In the era when Mr. Taylor practiced in Warrenton, there were still general stores. And when there were general stores, they always had porches, and the porches always had at least one man who was sitting there whittling and watching the world go by. Mr. Taylor was representing the plaintiff in an automobile negligence case. As it turned out, the accident had occurred not far from this particular general store, and he determined that there had been sort of an eyewitness. The problem was that the old man who was whittling on the front porch had not actually seen the accident, which occurred a quarter of a mile further along the road around a curve, but he had seen the defendant gone by. Mr. Taylor knew that this raised some possible issues regarding admissibility of an opinion on speed, and he addressed it thusly. Mr. Jones, when the red car went by, what, if anything, did you say? And while his opponent was still gathering steam to decide whether to stand up and object or not, the witness answered, and what he said was, "Well, sir, what I said was, roll on, young man, hell ain't half full yet." Mr. Taylor was a perfectionist. Any written or verbal presentation that came from him was neatly tied with a bow and had never a wasted word. He would tell you endlessly, never use two words when one will do, never use a big word when a little word will do. The fact that the Supreme Court gives you a 20-page page limit does not mean that you have to write 20 pages. His personality trait in this regard dovetail nicely with the personalities of his partners, Mr. Mop and Mr. Ellis, who were perhaps, I think Mr. Ellis will concede, not quite so detail-oriented. You could witness this when they were together in the courtroom, but also on the golf course. Mr. Taylor would carefully wipe his hands several times on a towel that he kept on his belt, and then he would consider the shot from 5 different angles, and then he would finally get his club out and make it. Mr. Ellis would be pacing back and forth, anxious, impatient, waiting to get his turn to see how far he could throw his club after he mishit his shot. Mr. Taylor was a wonderful correspondent. I know this because we shared a secretary. And for all the years that we shared her, she was under standing orders that even if I had an appellate brief due that very day, his personal letters to his beloved children and sisters took precedence. He would take joy in reminding me that he had told me repeatedly, "Don't leave your brief to the last day." He enthusiastically adopted email, and even after his eyesight failed him in retirement, he managed to keep up a steady stream of correspondence to his friends. Because he was such a good writer, he was an excellent, and I will tell you, an iron-willed editor. Your graduation from the Taylor School of Legal Writing occurred when you finally got a piece of your work product back and it did not have a single red mark on it. For me, and I was an English major as an undergraduate, that took me 4 years. For many of my compatriots at Mop and Taylor, it never occurred. It was not that they were boneheaded, they were just stubborn, and they knew if they waited long enough, they could out-stubborn him and get senior and no longer have to send him things for review. Mr. Taylor loved the South and its history. There came a point when it was perhaps not an advantage to us to have a portrait of General Lee in each of our 3 senior partners' office when a politically correct corporate counsel from up north would come down here to interview us for work. But he wasn't changing. One of the traits of the Old South that he particularly admired and would never compromise was the ironclad rule that your word is your bond. I was always conscious that the reputation that he and Mr. Ellis and Mr. Maupin had established for our firm was ours to either preserve or ruin each time that we set foot in a courtroom. I was reminded particularly of this once during jury selection when my opponent asked the fairly standard question, does anybody know Mr. Williamson or his law firm, Maupin, Taylor, and Ellis? He went on to rub it in a little further. At that time, our offices were in what's called the insurance building, and it's impermissible to mention insurance in a case where the individual defendant is insured. He got around that by saying, know that law firm which has its addresses in the insurance building. One juror put up their hand. Nice looking man. Follow-up question. What do you know about them? Well, I don't know Mr. Williamson, but I do know the law firm, and generally what I know about them is when they tell you something, you can take it to the bank. When a firm management role and first chair trial responsibilities finally came to me, I quickly recognized how lonely it is when the buck stops with you. You look around and you see that there's no longer anyone older or smarter or more experienced than you to ask for help. And what you do is you stand up and solve the problem because long ago someone took the time to teach you how. In that regard of responsibility, I'll tell you one last war story, and that's the end of them. In one of the first cases for which I did have first chair responsibility, we represented the plaintiff in a contract action, and it was being tried in Hillsborough, North Carolina. Hillsborough had an old-fashioned high-ceiling courtroom which was not air-conditioned, and it was summer, so the windows were open. I was worried about my ability to pull this off, and even though I had prepared the case, I asked Mr. Taylor to come and be there with me for the week just to make sure I didn't make any missteps. He did. It came to that moment in the case where, as a plaintiff, your gut begins to sort of tighten up because it's time to rest your case. And you know that your opponent is waiting there if you have not gotten each and every element of your proof in to say, Your Honor, I move for a direct verdict. So I turned to Mr. Taylor and said, Mr. Taylor, I'm about to rest. Do I have all my elements in? He says, John, I hate to tell you, but I haven't heard a damn thing all week. It was failed hearing and not any failure of the brain power that drove him out of the courtroom. I truly hope that I fully thank Mr. Taylor for all that he did for me and many like me. It was both a privilege and a joy to have known him. With the court's permission, I now say, as I did in Hillsborough, the plaintiff rests, and if it pleases the court, Mr. Ellis will do the closing argument.
I just felt like after T and I had spent so many years together that I needed to say a few words, although John has carried the ball very well. And just as an aside, I see Frank Bullock here today, Judge Bullock, and T and I were always privileged after Jesse got elected to office to make recommendations to him for judicial appointments that the U.S. Senate makes. And I see that Jim Dever is here, and he was one of Jesse's prizes, and so is Frank Bullock, and Tom Farr, who was in our firm, was recently found by the American Bar Association to be well qualified by all the members of the bar committee, which is almost unheard of. The reason I wanted to speak something here today is because of Bill and Elizabeth. And T. Taylor, we've now heard, is the greatest living human being, no, deceased human being. But Ida Taylor was the most gracious wonderful lady I ever knew. And she and T golfed together, traveled together, loved together. And it is my privilege to say something about Bill and Elizabeth, that your mama was certainly one of the greatest ladies that ever lived. Thank you very much.
Lenny, before you adjourn us this afternoon, as a point of personal privilege, I'd like to call George Anderson to the podium.
May it please the court. Members of the Wake County Bar and friends, we gather again today to celebrate the lives and times of these great deceased members. For almost 15 years, Lenny Jernigan has accepted the responsibility of gathering information, chairing the meetings, and preparing the program through his law office. Lenny, along with Betty Jo, wait, that's Betty Jo, there she is, Creed has blessed us with the audio and video facilities for these occasions. And on behalf of the members of the Memorial Committee and the Wake County Bar, we thank you, Lenny Jernigan.
Appreciate that very much. It's a real honor to do this, and it's a privilege, and I've enjoyed it, and I think all the other members of the committee have. I'd ask them to stand up, the people that are on the committee, if you would, and I know that you are on it, George, and Earl Purser's not here today. Where is Earl? Thank you all for your help. Is Alice Roman here? Alice is the executive director of the Wake County Bar Association. She always, the Wake County Bar, and she also does a wonderful job for us. Betty Jo does the heavy lifting, as we know. I do want to give a round of applause to our speakers, who are just absolutely outstanding. So from the bottom of our hearts on the committee and all those who had the opportunity to share the lives of these gentlemen and these fine lawyers, we really appreciate you being here today. I'm going to turn it over to you, Judge, and let you close us out.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a privilege to preside over this special session of Wake County Superior Court. Bailiff, would you adjourn us, sine die?
All rise. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. Honorable Superior Court special proceeding for the county of Wake now stands adjourned. Sine die. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. God save the state, Honorable Court.
Hey,